Hey everybody, it's Dude Leos here. How you doing? Alrighty then. Today I'm going to be talking about the garbagiest weapon since Halo's conception. The assault rifle. This talk also applies generally to automatic weapons, just in shooter games in general. But for publicity reasons, I'll be focusing on Halo in particular. Especially considering that Halo is one of my favorite games of all time, and it actually introduced me to how fun an assault rifle can be, like an automatic weapon can actually be in a game. And the Halo 1's assault rifle is my favorite assault rifle of all time, and that's probably evident by the fact that, well, my channel originally was going to be Halo CE Auto Slayer. So let me just get into a little bit about myself and why I'm making this video. So a lot of people who know me know that, well, I'm on the spectrum of autism. And anybody who knows about autism knows that we like to be very interested in very specific things. You're interested in a game, I'm interested in something about the game, very specific. So I really like video games, and I want to talk about automatic weapons because that's one of my narrow interests is automatic weapons in shooter games, along with Walker Systems and City Builders and Duke controllers. I love the Duke controller. It's my favorite controller of all time. It's the coolest thing in it. Anyways, so I want to be specific here. I'm not interested in automatic weapons in shooter games. I'm interested in high bloom, high spread automatic weapons. Different types of bloom, different types of spread for them. I'm fascinated with the idea that you can make a automatic weapon require skill. Or can you? Can you make an automatic weapon require skill? That's the question we're going to be asking today. In my journey of discovering and learning about automatic weapons in shooter games, I came across the obvious problem that everybody has with them. That's that basically they require no skill. They're the garbage gun of any game. You drop them, you move on, right? In Halo, the assault rifle is basically a pea shooter that you drop for literally anything else, and it's just a gun you give up. The reasons for this are actually very good and by design. You see, if automatic weapons are too powerful, then you could spray down enemies really easy. They're generally the gun people go to when they can't use anything else. And I'm going to explain here in this video why that's the case, how come automatic weapons can't require skill, while they'll never be in a competitive situation unless you make drastic altering changes. Halo CE's assault rifle, and in some cases the other Halo's assault rifles, have the highest potential for skill expression when it comes to skill ceiling. Now, before you get up in arms about that, the idea that, Halo's assault rifle actually requires skill, which, in the context of a competitive situation, it doesn't require skill. So how can a game have, how can something have a higher skill ceiling than everything else and not actually require any skill? Now, that comes down to understanding the different levels of skill, the different types of skill involved in playing a game. And I hate when people say that these types of skill are interchangeable, because they're not. And in many situations, these skills actually come at each other's expense. Now, the first skill I'm going to be talking about is skill ceiling. And then we're talking about skill gap. And then we're talking about entry level. So those are the three main skills, basically. And, there's a misconception that goes around that suggests that skill ceiling and skill gap are interconnected somehow. And for the majority of design, maybe that is. But when you get to a certain point, you're starting to make trade-offs. You're starting to be like, okay, this has more skill ceiling, but it comes at the expense of the skill gap, and vice versa with other things. So, then if that's the case, what is it? Well, first of all, a skill ceiling is how good you can get at something. A skill gap is the difference between someone who's good at it and someone who's not in terms of results. The reason why Halo's assault rifle is not competitive is because the skill gap in the effective use of it is so low that it makes almost absolutely no difference whether you actually use it good or not. But it has such a high skill set. You can get so good with it, better than any other gun. Because, I mean, let's face it, it's a fully automatic weapon, which means that the skill ceiling is the highest it's going to be. You have to keep your target under your cursor the whole time in order to maximize the kill, right? And in the case with early Halo games, like Halo CE, the bloom mechanic and the sheer spread of the weapon meant that you're always trying to get closer. So there was always something to do. It was never good enough. Your distance was never good enough. So you would always try to get closer, and there was always ways to get closer, and there was always things you could do to get closer. And the bloom mechanic ensured that when you shot your weapon, you had to make your gun had to be, or your cursor had to be already over the target, and you couldn't just hold down the trigger and spray over it, because then your shots would be less accurate. Your initial shots that were hitting your target would be less accurate and have less of a chance of hitting them. You wanted to make sure that the initial shots hit your target, so you wouldn't pull the trigger until your cursor was over the target. Now, to a lot of people, by a complete misconception, the bloom for a assault rifle is basically, or just any gun, it's basically a burst mechanic. This could not be further from the truth. Okay? There's actually no hypothetical situation unless you're going to make the gun completely like out of this world, like the most uncomfortable, unintuitive weapon ever, that you would actually have a weapon that you would actually have to burst where bursting was more effective. There's no hypothetical situation where bursting is more effective, no matter how you make the gun. And that's just the case with any weapon, unless you're at super long ranges. And if you're bursting, you're slowing down your kill by so much that your opponent's going to get away. Just if you're at a distance, he's going to get away. And you can't up the power of the rifle, because if you do that, it'll throw the balance off of the whole game. Now the weapon's too powerful up close. And so you have to have it weak enough to dispose your opponent, and to take a long time to dispose your opponent when up close. It can't require burst. It can't be a gun where you're more effective bursting. That's like not possible. Okay? In every single hypothetical situation you burst, you could just hold down the trigger and kill faster. And, the only thing that could possibly happen when it comes to bursting is that, in some case, in some crazy scenario, when you hold down the trigger, you miss more shots from randomness than you would if skipping them in the bursting. And that almost hypothetically, that almost never happens. It almost never happens. It almost always guarantees that you're going to hit your shots if the majority of your shots are going to hit if you're holding down the trigger. And that's just a fact. There's no bursting. Okay, so let's just get bursting out of our mind right now. Okay, I used to be like into burst, and I thought bursting was cool. And you don't need it. Like it requires no skill, really. You just pull the trigger and then you let go, and then you pull the trigger and then you let go. Like, what kind of skill is that, right? And there's no ineffective way of doing it. You can't mess it up. So how can it be a skill expression if it can't go wrong? If you can't make a mistake and be like, dang, I would have got that kill if I didn't do that. That doesn't happen when you're in bursting. So it's just you pulling the trigger and letting it go. Like, there's no punishment if you do it wrong. There's no punishment if you time it wrong. It's just, it's just so little to it. So let's just get bursting out of the mind right away, okay? These automatic weapons, that's not their frontier. Automatic weapons, that's not their goal. That's not their frontier. That's not what they're good at. What they're good at is being weapons that you have to put your cursor over, because of the bloom mechanic initially, to increase the chance of the speed at which you kill your opponent. You have to make sure your cursor's over them first because of the bloom, and then you shoot. The first shots are guaranteed, and then you gotta do something. You gotta get closer or whatever to make sure that the other shots hit as the weapon starts to bloom out. And if you can't get closer, then you just have to work with what you got. You got, just hose them down. And the skill basically is keeping your cursor over the target the entire time you're shooting. That's basically the skill ceiling, which is higher than anything else. Unless you're talking, of course, about like guns that have no aim assist and stuff like that, right? So how could this go wrong? How how could like a gun that has such a huge skill ceiling have such a little skill gap? Well, for the exact reasons it has a huge skill ceiling, it has a low skill gap. You see, if the gun fires automatically, and that's the functionality, and I have to keep my cursor over him the whole time in order for my opponent to die as quick as possible, there's also very little difference in whether I can actually do that or not. Because if I miss my shots, I can just recorrect my aim and my shots are hitting again, right? So all I did was miss those shots. With any other gun, if you miss a shot, you have to wait before you fire another shot, right? So there's a punishment, there's a delay. And that's the problem with automatic weapons, basically, is that, they're automatic. For the exact same reason they have a huge skill ceiling, they also have a low skill gap. The bloom mechanic of the assault rifle actually makes it require more skill in terms of skill ceiling, but not in skill gap. It actually comes at the expense of skill gap. And the reason for that is because it makes it random. It's a random spread. It's random. And the objective of the reason why it increases the skill ceiling is because I can get in really close and dump on my opponent. And if my whole spread is over the opponent, that'll maximize my kill. Making sure that that's the case requires a lot of skill, especially if I'm putting my cursor over the opponent, and just a combination of all the things, putting my cursor over the opponent initially before pulling the trigger, closing in on my opponent as I'm shooting, or keeping my cursor trained over the opponent, over his center of mass, enough for all the spread shots around to hit. Now, the assault rifle is actually kind of a genius weapon because in situations where it requires less skill to use, it's easier to use. And that's like exactly how a weapon should work. Like if in situations where it's, like at a distance, right? The cursor encompasses a large area. The larger, if your target is smaller on that cursor because he's further away, then it's going to have less chance of hitting. It's going to be more random. It's going to be, because it's like that, there's such a slow kill time that you just don't even consider that viable option. So it can be useful for finishing off your opponents if they're at a distance and you can hold down the trigger. But usually, in situations where you can finish off your opponents, you haven't been shooting beforehand. And if you have been, then okay, you have a less chance of finishing off an opponent at distance. But if you haven't been shooting beforehand, you're going to have the accuracy bonus of an unbloomed shooting state, where you can put your cursor over your target, fire. The initial shots are more likely to hit, and so the finishing off of the opponent is a lot faster. Now, with other weapons, even though the skill ceiling isn't as high, because you don't have to keep your cursor tracked over your opponent the whole time in order to maximize its effectiveness, because that's how high the skill ceiling is, keeping your cursor tracked over it the whole time. But because it's like that, it has a low skill gap, because the ability to compensate for missed shots is ridiculously high because of the fire rate, that it doesn't matter as much if you're tracking him the whole time as it is when you're just spraying. So it ends up being just kind of a spray gun. That's not the case with other weapons that have a break when you fire. So if you fire like a battle rifle, it has 3 shots where you have to keep track the whole time. This is why people like the battle rifle, because the battle rifle is essentially everything good about an automatic weapon with everything good about a single shotgun. You have to keep track the whole time on the burst to hit all the shots. But there's a break, so someone can essentially evade, move, do whatever. There's space for them to do things. As is in the case with automatic weapons, it's so easy that when you have a person who can maximize their potential, their shot effectiveness, that there's no breaks at all in the fire. You just shoot and lock onto your opponent and track them, and if they can do that, you can't get away. There's no breaks between the fire. There's nothing like that. In order for there to be counterplay, there needs to be breaks in the fire. And that's traditionally that's how counterplay works in shooter games, is that the person shoots and you kind of take turns shooting kind of thing. Not always. Sometimes you still fire at the same time, obviously. But there's some kind of exchange happening where counterplay is available. I can, if I have no shields, and someone shoots their burst, I know I can stick my head out and throw a grenade or something like that, right? Like there's something I can do, and that counterplay allows, this person is shooting good. Well, this person can do something about it, and then this person has to shoot better, and so forth, right? And that doesn't happen with the assault rifle because the assault rifle is automatic. Once the person tracks their target and shoots whenever he pops out, or once they've maximized their what they can do with it, there's no counterplay. The opposing player who's being shot at can't do anything about it. He's just locked in. He's just locked into gunfire until he dies. So one of the main points that I'm trying to make here is, automatic weapons are not open to counterplay regardless of how high their skill ceiling is. And because of that, there's a limit in terms of how high the skill ceiling of the game is in general. Because strafe is also a skill. Not just shooting the gun, but strafing and throwing grenades and other things. And there's no counterplay in an assault rifle. You just shoot it. And you just use the AR. And it's just the AR. And the only time that there is counterplay with the AR is when people are bad with it. When people they're bad enough at the game where they can't really fully keep track of their opponent. But even then, you don't know when the curse is essentially going to be over you and when it's not going to be on you. So there's no way of determining whether, you can stick your head out or not, because it's all based on the enemy's player's aim. Now, in the case with like a BR, for example, I know when a person can't shoot. If they've shot, I know they can't shoot for a certain period of time, so I can do something in that period of time. And that's counterplay. Regardless of how amazing their aim is, there's still counterplay. If they can track my head the whole time with the BR or the DMR or any precision weapon, or the sniper or whatever, there is still always counterplay because there's a break between shots, and there's a moment I can build up to be like, okay, now I do the strafe, or now I do the slide, or I'm going to make sure I don't get the 3 shot, or I'm going to by doing this I'm going to avoid the 3rd shot, or whatever. There's structure and for counterplay to happen. And that's not the case with weapons that are fully automatic. Now, I know that the very interesting thing about the assault rifle especially is like 343 attempting to make it a part of the competitive beta of the game. It's not going to be competitive. Okay? It's like, it's like a garbage gun. It has to be. It has to be one of the weakest weapons in the game in order for it to not to interfere with the skill of the game in general. Yes, the gun requires skill, but it interferes with the skill of the game in general, and there's no counterplay to your skill, right? And that's the thing that people need to understand. And there's been kind of a lot of debate, a lot of arguments around, assault rifles in the past and like automatic weapons in the past. People think, oh, well, if you just toned down the aim assist and made it really hard to use, then it would be competitive, right? Because it would require more skill. So that's what they did. That's what 343 did. And they did everything they could. They made it more accurate. They made it more require more skill. And it's, so now that the area of how many people can't use the weapon that I've described earlier, where, I've described how counterplay is only possible with the assault rifle when you get below a certain level of ability to aim, because then you get, right? But even then, you have, you still can't do proper counterplay because you don't know when the person's essentially going to be, their aim's going to be over you or not. So there's no, predictability I can use to, slip between the cracks and do what I need to do. But, that's what they think. They think that if you make the gun wobbly, if you raise that level of how many people essentially can't use it, then you're going to have lots of counterplay, right? But it still is not a gun that is appropriate for counterplay, as I described, right? Even if you can aim it, it's still not really open to counterplay. It's minimally open to counterplay. If you have it above a certain point, if all the players above a certain point where they can track the whole time, then you just have the same problem. So all you've done was raise the entry level for like being able to track your opponent, right? And even then, it's not really, you can't really do anything, right? You can't really do anything about it when you're getting shot, and that's like what a lot of competitive players will tell you, and that's why they say that. They're like, when someone dumps on you as an AR, you can't do anything about it, right? that's basically the gist of what they're trying to say, and I understand that, and I believe it, and I absolutely agree with it, because the objective is to understand what's going on. It's not to fight for how you want the game to be. It's to understand how the game works and try to work around it. I absolutely love ARs, but this is the way that they are.
I absolutely love ARs, but this is the way that they are.
Assault rifles and automatic weapons are never going to be a part of a competitive meta, no matter how hard you try, and they should just abandon the idea. Like, really, the people should just accept that. Like, I love assault rifles, but that's just not how automatic weapons work. It just doesn't work. There's been people here and there that have come out said, why 343 basically says Halo is a competitive game at conception, and it's not. It was a party shooter, and a lot of people detest that. Detest the notion that it was a competitive game. Yes, it branched into a competitive game, and a very good one, but it's a party shooter first and foremost. It's a game you collect together, you come together with your friends. It's like Mario Kart, but a shooter game, basically. And there's a demographic of people that nobody really takes into consideration when they think about what their games appeal to, and they always think, oh, this is the casual fan base and this is the hardcore fan base. But there's also a mid-core fan base, right? Casuals are like people who play Call of Duty. Hardcores are people who play competitive Halo, and then a lot of your party games are actually in the mid-core range. So they require skill, but there's usually things in it, that make it so that weaker players have some kind of advantage going for them. They call it rubber banding. In original Halo, there was actually rubber banding in the original Slayer. I think it was Halo CE original Slayer, not the Pro Slayer, but the just Slayer mode. You start off with a plasma pistol, which is completely different than any other Halo. And there's rubber banding. If you die, you move faster when you spawn, and if you get kills, you move slower. And that's kind of something I'd like to see Halo go back to, like just the party game style shooter where everybody collects together, 2 versus 2, 4 player free for all, whatever, on a console, and they're going at each other in like mid-core environment, like Mario Kart. And there's all this stuff you can get good at. You can get really good at it, but it doesn't interfere with your ability to play the game if you're not good at it. There's mechanics in it that give you an advantage, just like rubber banding and whatnot. But the game is generally, the rubber banding is generally done in a way where if you're a good player, if you're really good, then it's not going to affect you all that much. That's where I think that the assault rifle shines. I think it shines on auto slayer game modes, and to promote variety and to increase the skill ceiling as much as possible, giving you something to do, always something to do, always the next step. I can always get closer. I can always plan better. I can always, get a better nade before I shoot. I can always, whatever. Focus on that gameplay that you get with like the variety of auto slayer, party game, and when you play party game with your friends, and just stuff like that. And focus on the assault rifle playing that kind of role in Halo, and stop trying to focus on shoehorning absolutely everything into competitive and trying to make it trying to force it into esports, because the majority of people are casual gamers, and I hate saying that because they appealed to casuals in Halo 4, and the fan base had no longevity, and then they had this backlash where now they're like, oh, it's a competitive game, and and to try to retain some semblance of longevity, basically. And yeah, I think that it fails ultimately because the pendulum is just swinging too much to the opposite direction. And I think that the main element of Halo isn't that it's casual or anything like Call of Duty or anything like that. It's not the formula. It's not, Battle Royale or anything like that, trying to follow trends. And it's not, this, super elite competitive game either. I think that along the spectrum, there's casual, core, and competitive gamers, and they all benefit from a game that is designed. It's a party game with skill expression, with rubber banding that can be removed. For example, in Pro Slayer, it can be removed. With weapons that can be removed for competitive gameplay experience, or weapons that can be removed for a casual gameplay experience, and just focus on just being a sandbox shooter that has different kinds of weapons that plays different roles for different fans and whatnot, rather than trying to shoehorn everything into a single game mode. Assault rifles in Halo 5 and Halo Infinite have had the highest skill gap of any assault rifles in any of the games. But that's not saying much. It's not that much more than, like the assault rifles in other games. But it has the lowest skill ceiling also because you don't have to be as close to use it. You don't have to, there's all this planning around it that you normally have to do for like when you play Halo 3 and you're using the SMG, right? You should have to deal with people at lower levels of gameplay dropping on, ambushing you with like SMGs, shotguns, all these close range weapons. And they kind of remove that from the game because they want everything to be shoehorned inside like competitive atmosphere and like esports atmosphere, scenario and atmosphere. And I think that's just like, that's not really what Halo's about. It's not about, one group of people over another. Right? It's about having a variety of game modes that like you play. And there's like Griffball, there's Objective, there's Team Slayer, there's Auto Slayer, Precision Slayer, Action Sack. There's all these things you can do, right? What I think they should do with the assault rifle is do it justice. Just make it, make it focus on what it's good at. Give it the highest skill ceiling ever, and then just don't think about the skill gap at all. Don't think about its role in competitive game at all. Just make it something that you jump into an Auto Slayer game, and it has all this crazy stuff about it, like bloom and spread, and you have to be close and all that. What makes Halo core gameplay, its party gameplay, like really good? It uses a combination of skill gap and skill ceiling, but also has a low entry level. And what I mean by that is the assault rifle is basically the best at doing this because you have a high spread weapon that is the easiest to get into. It's the easiest to use. You just hold down the trigger, right? But you can get in depth with it. You can get closer. You can burst. You can, track your opponents better. You can throw the grenade before you shoot. It has, it encompasses perfectly the golden triangle formula that Halo works off of. Grenades, melee, and shooting, and it just works perfectly in that scenario. But it also has like the highest skill ceiling because there's always something to do. You can always get closer. You can always, and you don't always in every situation have the opportunity to get in close because of the slow movement speed. It's because it needs slow movement speed, right? The game, it's for it to function. It just needs it. The players can always back off, for example, no matter how fast or slow the movement speed is. So slow movement speed generally makes it better. In a context where someone is at a far distance and they're shooting at you with the assault rifle, and you can actually wait for them to overshoot, and then their spread is high, and then you can close in, get just close enough, not just make sure you're far away enough for the majority of their shots to still miss. And if you shoot properly, you actually have a chance of reversing the fight because of the bloom. That's how the bloom actually offers that. That's not the case with the other assault rifles from the other Halos because the movement is too slow and the spread is too low. Now I'm going to explain that for a minute here. So early on in the burst phase, your shots are very accurate. Later in the burst phase, your shots are very inaccurate. And the more inaccurate your shots are in general, just in the early and later phases, the more fluidity there is in assaulting. Because I can always step in and out of range. Take a few steps, step in and out of range. But when there's your accuracy is very high at very long ranges and has almost precision at long ranges. It isn't like Halo 5 and Halo Infinite. And it has just a little bit of inaccuracy just outside of the cursor, just barely. I mean, yeah, it is more realistic because you can shoot it at a distance, which is what rifles are for. But there's less fluidity because now I have to move more to go in and out of certain ranges for the weapon in order to do a reversal. And reversals aren't always entirely possible. They're really hard to pull off, and they only happen out of luck mostly. But it was really rewarding to do it because you know that it was only because you did it this very specific way and you knew the ranges of the weapons had the most and least chance of hitting at certain distances, at certain stages of blue, that you could actually have pulled it off. And that makes it really satisfying. But it's still, all it does is increase your chance of surviving the encounter. It doesn't completely flip it. It's still random. But that's exactly kind of why I like it when an assault rifle, when an automatic weapon is very inaccurate. And I think that the Halo CE rifle does it the best. Because it doesn't try to be a competitive weapon. It doesn't try to work in the competitive sandbox. It doesn't try to not be random. It's just like shameless what it is. And because of it, it's actually better than the other assault rifles because it encompasses what makes automatic weapons good, and that's having a huge skill set, not a huge skill gap, right? The skill gap is like really small, but it has a big enough skill set to make you always think about what you're doing. And a large portion of what makes casual Halo really fun, and core Halo or party Halo, really fun, is this idea of like, there's so much to know, but when you put it all together, you get opportunities where this guy was just in this perfect range and and it just works so well that you've come up with like a double or triple kill or something like that, right? And you're happy about it because it was only because you knew that you knew all the things you did, how the weapons bursting works, how the spread works, how the melee works, how and the combination of everything together, that you came out on top on that situation. Even if like the chance of that situation actually happening and you having that much, you being able to apply that knowledge is very low, it's still satisfying enough to have that experience that you'll play a bunch of like meaningless games just to have moments where you have that. This is where assault rifles are king. This is where like the assault rifle is like the best gun. It's like the best starting weapon. It's the best gun because it emphasizes on this idea of like anything can happen, right? Like it's like you don't always want it. You want to drop it for other weapons so you have range, but these people can sometimes use it, and there's always things to it. There's like the bursting, there's the reloading, there's the there's always something going on. There's always something to it, right? In the situation that you're in, that you just always find that in all sorts of different kinds of situations arise from like having such a huge amount of variety that the assault rifle offers that doesn't exist when the starting weapon is like a BR or a DMR or whatever. And that's like the gold thing about the assault rifle. And that's what I think they should focus on more, is like how to get a game to do that and not trying to shoehorn it into a realm or trying to make it into something where it's never going to be used. Like when is the assault rifle really used in like an MLG competitive game? Like it's not, you don't ever see it being used. Nobody ever uses it. It's like, why? Like you're just so you just do all this work to make it so that when I watch MLG competitive, there's assault rifles on the map that nobody uses, basically. And it just doesn't make any sense, like why why take something away from what it's good at, try to shoehorn it as something it's bad at, and then nobody uses it? Why not just focus on aspects about the game where the assault rifle actually enhances the gameplay, right? And this is not just the case with the assault rifle. As I mentioned earlier, this applies to any automatic weapons in any games, right? I think that they should genuinely try to make casual core party game with, people like split screen and stuff like that. If they double down on that, then they can have an assault rifle. Why focus on gameplay where you only see this weapon like 0.01% of competitive games at like a low level? Why not have the assault rifle something that you see all the time because you put it in a game where it actually works? This is the thing I don't get. But basically, one of my key arguments that I want to make down and I want to put out is it doesn't matter how hard it is to use the assault rifle. It doesn't matter how low the aim assist is, how accurate the gun is, how low the bloom is, how accurate it is, how non-random it is. It doesn't matter. None of that matters at all because it comes down to the simple fact it's an automatic weapon. And automatic weapons, when you employ them skillfully, are not open to counterplay. And I can raise that bar. How skilled you have to be to be able to do that, and it'll still not be open to counterplay at the highest levels, which means you can't have it more powerful. You can't have it. The best thing to do with the assault rifle is just that it always lowers the skill gap. It always lowers the skill gap, and the best thing to do with it is to nerf it. Basically, to make it useless, like it was in every other game. It's not a good thing to have a powerful assault rifle because even though it has a huge skill ceiling and it requires a lot of skill to use, it will always lower the skill gap of the whole game in general. It'll always lower the skill ceiling of the whole game in general. So mainly, the thing I want to say is automatic weapons are not going to have a role in competitive gaming. It's just not going to work. Like, there are certain things you can do, and I'm going to cover that in another video. I have a video game that I've made that I play for myself that has an automatic weapon, a high spread, high bloom automatic weapon that is not random. It's random in some situations, but it's mostly not random. It's competitive, friendly. I've never actually competed with these mechanics with anybody else, so I don't really know if they work or not in a competitive situation. But I'm always working on it. I'm always developing it. It's been a few years now, and these particular weapons are always being worked on so that they work in the game. And I have had more time to think about this, to address this, to handle the situation than most developers have to address any specific one gun in a game. I was kind of hoping that there would be a small series, 1 or 2 videos. If it's not going to be just in this video, then there's going to be another video where I talk about how I went about going about putting automatic weapons into my games, because they work really well. And they work, how they function, and how they're competitive friendly, how they're social friendly, how they're, how it works really, really well. And it's open. They're open to counterplay. They encourage bursting. As crazy as I said, the gun should never encourage bursting, but these particular guns, they have a certain situations where you would want to burst, and it actually requires a lot of skill to do so. Make sure you like and subscribe. Well, see you later.